So, welcome back to Thrones of Britannia, and when you think of the Viking Age, the thing that sticks out as being most iconic is of course the Viking Raids and their longships and their naval assaults. So this is what I'm going to be doing today, and it is obviously a big part of Thrones of Britannia in many ways. On the campaign map, the fact that you can navally invade, major settlements means you can completely circumvent a siege, although it does often turn out to be a little bit more costly than otherwise it would, but in my opinion it is very worth it just to see the Viking longships in action. And this is going to take place in northern Wales, because my opponent is going to be playing as the Welsh kingdom of Gwyneth, and I'm going to be playing as the Viking faction of Sudreyar. And Sudreyar are actually who I was in the campaign that I've finished, where I've gone all the way to ultimate victory, so definitely enjoyed my time getting involved with the Viking Sea Kings campaign mechanics. But in terms of a unit roster, there is a case for saying that maybe they aren't quite as potent as the Danelaw factions or the Norse invaders. But they do have some individual units which can be used to pretty good effect, and mainly this comes down to the unit which I base my army upon, at least when it comes in comparison to Danelaw in particular. But I have also split my army up, so because this is technically an unfortified port assault, we have a bit of the settlement over here, and we also have another part of the settlement over here, which includes this mining complex over here, and then the central town over here. So actually, I will be able to inflict some morale debuffs on my enemy by burning down these structures as I pass them, I think. At least I believe that's how it works, even in the unfortified versions. But obviously the vast bulk of my damaging infantry, at the very least, is going to be out here on these boats. So let's have a look at the first wave, shall we? And my central force is going to be made up of these Eastman Herdmen. And this is the strongest sword infantry that the Viking Sea Kings, at least Sudreyar, can field. And the reason why I base my army more on swordsmen than I did on axemen is because the Welsh kingdoms are, well, their infantry is at their strongest in their spearmen. As I just get to the front as we see the first wave here. And in the rock, paper, scissors of the infantry in Thrones of Britannia, swordsmen beat spears, so by fielding my strongest swordsmen, I should be able to trade very effectively with the strongest Welsh spears, which is where they're going to have their strongest units. And obviously I think over here I think I've got 4 units of the Eastman Herdmen. They are relatively expensive, but it is a unit that the Danelaw factions don't have access to, and they do have more melee skill than the mailed Danelaw swordsmen, I believe. So this is really the one area in which the Sea Kings can afford a bit of an advantage over Danelaw, because Danelaw, as a general rule, I've got 5 units of Herdmen in fact. Danelaw do have some very nasty units indeed that they can leverage, in particular their axes, which they have a little bit more variety of in the high tier units. I've got one boat out here which is carrying a unit of Eastmen archers. The Sea Kings archer line obviously is not terribly impressive, but it still pays to have a bit of a skirmish presence, particularly when I can use their critical chance to pretty good effect against the enemy cavalry. And of course just having a presence on the field is well worth it, even if the Welsh longbows are going to make mincemeat of them in an elongated fight. As my second wave over here, this was more of a sort of preventative measure against any potential Welsh swordsmen that I would come across. I've got, I think, 3 units of these Eastman mailed axemen, and of course in the rock, paper, scissors the axemen will beat the swordsmen, generally speaking. Now they aren't as effective in terms of their stats as my Eastman Herdmen, but they should still do some decent damage, and as a second wave I'm not sure Wales will be able to handle the sheer force that I'm coming at them with from the coastline at the very least. My land-based force is a little bit more thin on the ground, so yeah, 3 units of those. And then back here, hopefully I'm going to be able to use these lads to flank around the side. I've got 2 boats full of these Eastmen Huskarls, which in terms of their stats are not quite as effective as the equivalents from Danelaw, as I've gone through in a previous video, but they are nonetheless very, very dangerous, and it's obviously a unit which Wales in particular aren't going to be able to deal with off the charge. So hopefully if I can keep them clear from the cavalry and the archers, because obviously they've got no shield, so the longbows will be very effective against Huskarl units like this, even with their armour. I should be able to do some very nice damage to any spears and sword lines they've got set up along the coast. And then finally, we have my general's bodyguard over here, which is of course the Royal Huskarls, which are basically just a better version, individually speaking, in terms of the soldiers involved in them anyway, than the Eastman Huskarls. They are the general's bodyguard though, so they do have less men per unit, but obviously my general is going to be even more effective on the attack when he's in an axe unit like this, as opposed to the Hearthguard, which, while cheaper and have their shield value to withstand the Welsh arrows a little bit more, I wanted to use my sheer force in this battle to my advantage. Meanwhile, over here we have my land-based force, which is a little bit more thin on the ground, but I do have 4 units of these Spear Guard at the front, which are the strongest spears I have available to me. And they're not bad, honestly. I don't think they're quite as good as the very strongest Welsh spears, but they should be able to hold their ground against anything else in the Welsh roster. And mainly I've got these guys on land so that cavalry couldn't swamp my land-based force quickly. And obviously this means that I can post up in the town, because I'm going to be able to charge in there quickly and set up a nice defensive line. Just back here I've got 2 more units of the Eastmen Archers, again low tier levy bow infantry, but again I wanted to try and post up in the town for as long as I possibly could, and part of a defence of course is having some form of ranged presence. But on land I do also have, there they are, the fearsome berserkers, and the meta that surrounds these guys in the game is already the fact that they should be limited because they are incredibly dangerous in a prolonged melee. There are only 60 of them, but they're so difficult to take down and they do immense amounts of damage as well as causing fear to nearby units. There are only 2 of them on the field today though, and they are part of the smaller army, so this army could get swamped if I'm not careful. But now let's move over to Gwyneth, the Welsh kingdom, defending their northern coastline from these Viking raiders from the Kingdom of the Isles. Remarkably, didn't happen too much in the actual history. Wales was left mostly untouched. And over here at the front, just going to try and say this right, the Teulu Spear Guard, which are the strongest of the Welsh spearmen in either Strathclyde or Gwyneth. They are a very strong spear unit indeed, and I think they are stronger than anything I can field in that term as well. One of the strongest spear units in the game. Going to be quite difficult, honestly, and they could be one of the things which could hold the berserkers in position for an extended period of time. I don't think they'd win, but nonetheless he's got 2 units of them, and then as we move down the line I think he's got 3 units in fact, so 3 units of them, 4 units even. So he's invested a lot in his spears over here, which are going to form up a line. Fortunately I am closer to his settlement than he is, so I'm going to be able to take that relatively quickly. But this is obviously something that I haven't brought any of, and he's going to need to use his cavalry to very good effect if he's going to have any success here. The Royal Teulu are the stronger of the 2 cavalry bodyguard units that Gwyneth have available to them. Obviously very powerful off the charge, tier 3 elite melee cavalry. The Gaels have got some units which can go toe to toe with them, as of course have the Normans, but the Viking Sea Kings. Cavalry is not something they were known for, naturally. And then back here we've got some Royal Uchelwa. I'm sure that's wrong because the way the Welsh pronounce consonants is a little bit eccentric, shall we say. But yeah, he's got 3 units of them, so that's a big investment, but these are the best individual cavalry units outside of generals' bodyguards that Wales can field, so it doesn't surprise me to see them in this greater number, because if he was going to win this fight, he would need to leverage them in a big way. And the other thing he would need to leverage, well, not these, but he does have his best swordsman on display as well. He's got a couple of units of Welsh mailed swordsmen. Individually, I don't think they would be able to defeat my Eastman herdmen, but they would run them pretty close, honestly. But he does only have 2 of them, so I should be able to just overwhelm these Welsh infantry units. But the one thing, of course, which he does have over me is the archers. I have mentioned that cavalry and archers are not quite as powerful in Thrones of Britannia, but they are still very potent tools if you use them correctly, if you recognise their strengths and weaknesses within the mechanics of this game. So he has got 3 units of these longbows, and obviously they have, I think, increased range, increased accuracy, and they are one of the few units to have noticeably more missile damage. So it sets them apart from the other archers in the game. And on the approach, when my ships come into land, I might be in a little bit of trouble as this goes along. He's also got a unit of Warhounds. Warhounds inspire fear in your enemies as well, although they don't team this with extreme melee prowess like the Berserkers do. You can see they have relatively low stats. Having said that, they are a good flanking unit. If you can get some hammer and anvil with the Warhounds, it can panic an infantry line and cause them to rout. Whether he can do that here is unknown. And then he has his front line, which I don't think these are the Teulu. Indeed they aren't, they are the Royal Spearmen. So we get in and have a closer look at them. They are similar to the Royal Teulu Spear Guard, but having said that, they are a little bit lower tier. They are the tier below them, as it were. And if we have a look, they are the tier 1 elite spear infantry. But they are still very potent, and indeed my axemen will struggle to cut through these guys quickly, but this is what my swordsmen are for. This is exactly the sort of unit my Eastman herdmen will love to fight. And I think that is just about it. So let us begin. So obviously the naval invasion is going to be happening over here. But actually the first thing that I decided to move was I wanted to take this settlement as quickly as I possibly could so that I had a defensive position that I could not be overwhelmed through. And you can see here my spearmen are going to be leading the way. And I think I'm going to be burning down this settlement as I move through it, because it is technically under the control of the Welsh as I invade this land. I think it's going to be the Berserkers that are going to be tossing their torches as we move through. But we shall see. And I'm going to be obviously posting up in the choke points over here and meeting any Welsh advance that comes. His cavalry is coming over here, but this is where all of my spears are, so it is very unlikely that he's going to be able to get any sort of foothold over here. The best way he could use his cavalry, honestly, is to allow me to land on the beach, move in a little bit and then get some hammer and anvil, where his spears are the anvil and his cavalry is the hammer, of course. But I think he was eager to use his longbows on my ships as we approach, as they vault over these fences and knock them down in the process. There's a lot of cargo over here that my Vikings could potentially plunder. Here come the ships as we get a nice close-up here of the oars in action. And this is really one of the best sights in the game that I've noticed. These naval invasions. The naval combat itself is... I've never really enjoyed the naval combat in Total War overall. Looks like I'm going to crash into my own boats over here, which is unfortunate. But, you know, ever since Shogun 2, I haven't really been that enamoured with the naval combat, but I do like this concept, and it is very fitting for the age. Meanwhile, you can actually see that I'm going to be forming up a front line. My archers are already firing with their fire arrows. You can see that I have been burning down the settlement as I've moved through. My spear's getting into position. I'm going to be forming a sort of noob box in this crossroads over here, so his cavalry isn't afforded any ways in. And I'm going to form a shield castle so that any archers he has over here couldn't do any damage. But I actually needn't have bothered because he doesn't have any archers over here. He does have a couple of units of mailed swordsmen, and he's got all of his Tailou spear guard, which are of course going to be the most tricky of his infantry, well, of his footbound units to deal with. But I do have my berserkers over here, so I'm not that worried. But now let's get back over to the beach landing, the main event. He's done some pretty significant damage to this unit of Eastmen Herdmen over here with his longbows. The longbows are certainly the most potent archer in the game. They can still be skirmished down by lower tier skirmishers than themselves, so obviously just having a look at them, it's obvious they don't have the best armour values. But now let's have a look over here. The Viking landing. There's the Viking Swordsmen. And this is actually what I wouldn't have done if I were my opponent. He's actually posted up very close to my ships, which does mean that he'll be able to engage me as quickly as he possibly can, but this leaves no room for his cavalry to get in behind and charge me, to be honest. And ultimately his spears will slowly but surely start to be ground down by my swordsmen as they come forward. And also he doesn't have enough men to cover the whole shoreline, whereas I'm going to be able to post up all across the shore. Here we can see the male swordsmen, more swordsmen, and then over here I believe we have some axemen. Indeed we do. So I've got some axemen coming in from the flank. But one thing that I'm going to have to deal with, of course, is the range superiority of my opponent, as he fires in his longbows into the flank of my man. Very nicely done indeed. In fact, I think what we will do is just slow things down a little bit as we go along the line. The Welsh spear line will hold for a time, but ultimately this is going to be a cost-effective trade for me overall, unless he's able to do some severe damage. He has actually sent his warhounds in here, but he sent his warhounds into the front of my swords, which meant they mostly got butchered immediately because of their very low stats. Sending out my swords over here to just sort of try and chase down his skirmishers to make sure they couldn't do all that much damage. Let's have a look over here. There's still no engagement over here just yet. He's moving his infantry into position for an encirclement. His cavalry is behind, but he's got no obvious way in. He could have actually come this way and got into a bit of a soft spot, but I don't think he saw that, and instead he decided to cycle around. I'm landing my Huskars a little bit away from the fight so they aren't targeted by archers on the way in, and hopefully in the late game I'll be able to use them as a real hammer to proceedings. Over here you can see that this unit of spears is actually in the middle. They're relatively untouched, which is unfortunate because it would mean that they could try and wrap up the line. You can see this unit of Eastmen Herdmen, even though they are well armoured and well shielded, when the longbowmen were focus firing them down they didn't stand a chance, and now they're routing off. I do have these axemen coming in as well, and I'm just trying to get my axemen into a position where I can chase them off. Now you can see that my opponent is sending over these spears to shore up this line, because his spears are losing decisively to my elite sword infantry. Definitely a very good part to the Viking Sea Kings roster, the Eastmen Herdmen. I say Sea Kings, I've only really played Sudriyar in campaign and online so far because I prefer their colour scheme, but Difflin I think are a little bit more focused around javelins and more of the Irish influence that the Kerns have. These Eastmen Herdmen, however, still doing a decent job over here. But let's head over to the settlement and see how things are getting on, because the melee has begun. Let's get over here. And you can see that the Berserkers are getting into the flank, which is where you really don't want to see them, because even the Tailou Spear Guard are going to really struggle to keep them at bay. And you can see that my shield castle is also in effect. The Welsh spears are better, but I do have a bit of a hill advantage over here, and my units are in shield castle. And it's the Berserkers that I really want to do the damage. So that's good, and I think both units of Berserkers are down here. Indeed they are, so I'm trying to really crush in from this side. Over here, however, you can see that the smoking ruins of this village. are on display, and then you can see that the Welsh mailed swordsmen are over here. And over time, the Welsh mailed swordsmen, despite the fact the spear guard are very strong spearmen, in fact, they are elite spear infantry of tier 3, the swords will still be able to trade efficiently with them. So eventually I am going to have to move these guys out of Shield Castle, and then, oh, his cavalry's moving on. But I'm going to have to move the rear spear guard out of Shield Castle formation, which they've taken a little bit of range fire by the looks of things, and then I'm going to have to reinforce this line. But over here, I felt really confident about winning the settlement fight. So it will come down to the coastal fight for my enemy, and how he's able to do over there. And as we look around over here, you can see that the Royal Spearmen trying to chase down my Eastman mailed axemen, who are in the process of chasing those longbowmen off. Let's go back up to full speed, I think. You can see that my swordsmen still fighting like champions on the front line. The Welsh Spearmen really struggling to have too much of an effect on them. I've also dumped off more reinforcements over here, so we've got some Eastman mailed axemen. Not quite as strong as my swords, of course, but they're still going to be able to attack these Royal Spearmen in the rear. And just more and more forces pouring onto the shoreline. When the Vikings get rolling, their shock value is extremely high. These warhounds have finally been chased off by these Eastman herdmen. They came back from routing. I do actually have these archers in position as well. Of course, they're no match for the Welsh archers when they form up. Actually, I think I did get a unit into the archers over there. Indeed, some mailed axemen. But the mailed axemen are now completely surrounded. And also they took a charge in the rear from that cavalry. Speaking of the cavalry, though, my hard-hitting infantry for the coast, which was meant to secure my victory over here, my Eastmen Huscarls and my Royal Huscarls, my general is about to have a rude awakening because the Royal Uchelwa, which I know I'm saying wrong, but I can't say it right, Welsh is hard, are about to take a rear charge. I think I do turn them around to try and get a counter charge off, force of habit, of course, but my general taking a full frontal charge there. Not as many of them died as I thought were going to, but still not great for my general, that. But still, the enemy cavalry is now on the scene, and if they wrap up my line, I could be in trouble here. In combination with the longbows, I do have still a significant infantry advantage, but I've always had a significant infantry advantage. It's the cavalry and archers that I was always a little bit more concerned about. You can see here the berserkers are just slowly but surely chewing their way through these Tailou spear guard. Combat is even between them and my spear guard, and you can see that this is the battle of the tier 3 elite spear infantry. And if the buffs weren't present, I think they would be almost completely even. I think the Tailou spear guard are very slightly better. As we go through here, over the burnt buildings once again, we can see that the Welsh swordsmen putting up a good fight against the spear guard, despite that the Welsh swordsmen are cheaper than the spear guard, I believe, based on the fact that they are retinue sword infantry, as opposed to the elite spear infantry. So this means that my opponent will be getting some good value for money out here, but my berserkers are just chewing their way through the Tailou spear guard, and ultimately, I think my opponent did miss a bit of a trick here by not trying to utilise his cavalry and archers a little bit more effectively, and instead he played my own game rather and tried to engage me in a very grindy fight in both the settlement and on the shoreline, which the Welsh kingdoms are never going to be able to stand up to any of the Viking-inspired factions like that. Like, you can see the longbows are doing some pretty nasty damage to my Eastman Huscarls here, but ultimately not enough damage because more of the Huscarls are coming in, more Eastman herdmen, and the final vestiges of these Royal Spearmen here on the shoreline, who have already taken a bit of a beating, honestly, from the Eastman herdmen. He does have a unit of spare spears over here, but there's a limited amount he can do to really shore up this line. Huge amounts of infantry over here. I'm actually using these Eastman mailed axemen to try and form a shield wall. Here come more Eastman Huscarls. I really like the Skellige vibe you get from playing as the Sea Kings. Those Eastman Huscarls, we're going to be chasing them off. Let's have a look at what's going on in the settlement. You can see that now they're starting to rout off. I think actually if you have a look over here, you can see the berserkers are going crazy. They're waving their arms in the air. They're out of control. But also they are inspiring a huge amount of fear in the Welsh units. I will give credit to these Tailou spear guard. They've held on for a remarkably long time, considering the fact they've been pelted by fire arrows all this time. They've been attacked in the flank by berserkers, and they went uphill into a shield castle. They are, in my opinion, the strongest spear unit in the game that I have seen up to now. But they are about to be ravaged by the berserkers. The Welsh mailed swordsmen are... Combat is even over there, and that is the one place where Wales are managing to hold their own. The cavalry's coming in. Getting a nice charge there, but ultimately he's not really going to have enough. This is ultimately where I would have been vulnerable, because I've got no spears down here. But now I'm able to form such a large blob, and he's also relying on his poor longbowmen in melee against Huskarls. Needless to say, an archer who is wearing just a simple tunic is not going to be a match for a heavily armoured Huskarl. Eastman Huskarl, but yeah, this is what I think my opponent should have been doing earlier on, and I think he did at mid-defeat. But yes, the ocean did favour us, and he should have been using his cavalry and his ranged advantage to a little bit more effect, I think. I feel as though he probably would have been better off trying to contest the settlement a little bit more and just surrendering the beach to me immediately, because there was no chance he was ever going to be able to withstand the sheer force that I was subjecting him to on the coast. Relatively even kills, but I deployed significantly more men, because obviously the archers and the cavalry units in particular have got less men in them. Having a look at the units, one unit of Eastman Herman actually got 0 kills, and that was the one which got focused down by archers, so it does prove how strong they are. The berserkers just they do work. They lay waste to units whenever they get into contact with them. 217 kills. At least one unit of berserkers every time they've been used in a battle that I've been in has always broken 200. They are immensely powerful. And looking over here, Eastman Huskarl's doing a decent amount considering they arrived late on. They did very well. But the swordsmen were able to slowly but surely grind down the Welsh spears, which honestly didn't do bad against a unit which they would, in the rock, paper, scissors, struggle against. The archers doing good as well. The cavalry, those aren't the numbers you need to see for the cavalry. Even though cavalry is not as strong in this game, if you invest that much in it, you're going to need to see bigger numbers than that. And I think if he drew me away from the coast a little bit, drew me inland, particularly seeing as my spears weren't on the coast, I only had really one unit of archers which could have been used to try and ward off that cavalry, or I could have tried to nuke box up into Shield Castle, but considering I was on the attack, that would never have worked. So I do feel as though my opponent could very well have won this with the composition he had as well. But as it was, the battle played into my favour pretty much from start to finish. There was never a moment where I felt like I was on the ropes. But yes, definitely, I think I really enjoy playing as the Sea Kings. It's very fun to sort of insert as a Viking raider, I suppose. But Sudriyar victorious here on the Welsh northern coast. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.